India's rural microfinance sector has achieved staggering scale. Over 82 million women are now registered in collective financial structures across the country. The National Rural Livelihood Mission, or DAY-NRLM, has successfully pushed this mobilization to near market saturation. Basic access to microfinance and group savings is now a standardized reality in thousands of villages. Yet this massive participation rate reveals a severe economic bottleneck. Millions of women are saving and borrowing, but those localized financial activities are rarely translating into formalized, scaling businesses. The majority of these groups remain caught in a subsistence trap. They rely on localized, low-return manual labor, producing items like small-batch textiles or localized crafts. Their economic growth is physically capped by the limits of individual human output. Compare that localized production to the target destination for true economic mobility: macro-scale corporate supply chains. These markets demand massive volume and relentless consistency. The vast space between single-loom subsistence and high-volume corporate production is the graduation gap. The standard policy assumption is that injecting more micro-capital will naturally bridge this gap. The data proves otherwise. Providing a small loan to a localized group does not automatically generate the logistics network, compliance knowledge, or market access required to scale. Capital alone fails. To scale these collectives, we must engineer a convergent institutional framework, a deliberate architecture linking isolated self-help groups directly to local governance and corporate supply chains. Closing this graduation gap is the definitive macroeconomic challenge required to turn marginalized collectives into formal economic engines. To build this framework, we begin with the core node of our new system, the isolated self-help group. Before connecting this group to larger markets, we have to address why this single node frequently fails to scale, even when flush with external capital. This infographic breaks down female financial autonomy. Note the center. Of working women, only 25.6% were paid in cash. Compare that to the outer figures. Nearly 88% participate in household decisions, and 77% have bank accounts. High theoretical participation, low control. This is the gender paradox. The root cause of this paradox occurs as the microbusiness scales. When finances become complicated and market volatility increases, strategic control is routinely appropriated by male family members. This happens because female operators are constrained by a massive, unequal burden of domestic care. The institutional solution is to embed dedicated support directly into the collective. The group requires a localized financial advisor to manage complex investments, alongside continuous psychosocial support to protect the operator's strategic autonomy. By insulating the node with financial mentorship and structural care, the group stabilizes. Without securing female financial autonomy as the first step, any external scaling will simply transfer the wealth away from the operators, neutralizing the original empowerment goals of the collective. With the core node stabilized, we must construct the immediate environment required for it to survive and grow. The first external institutional layer is local governance, the Gram Panchayat. It acts as a hyper-local incubator, providing heavy infrastructure an isolated group cannot afford. Resources flow inward, including physical workspace, storage, and public sector procurement contracts to guarantee initial revenue. This resource flow is legally formalized through the Gram Panchayat Development Plan, which specifically earmarks capital and physical assets for micro-enterprise development. Secondarily, the Panchayat bridges the rural digital divide. By hosting common service centers within their offices, they provide the collectives with reliable internet access and digital hardware. Local governance provides the physical footprint and policy foundation. That infrastructure must exist before a microbusiness can interact with national markets. Even with physical infrastructure, a massive technical knowledge gap remains between the local panchayat and the complex demands of the corporate world. To bridge this gap, the framework taps into India's vast network of educational institutions and rural skill academies. Acting as external engines, they possess the specialized skills required for mass production, injecting this capacity directly through the local governance layer and into the core collective. The human deployment mechanism for this knowledge transfer is a dedicated cadre of community resource persons, often trained locally to deliver specialized business coaching via mobile technology. This is what that capacity building looks like on the ground. intensive, specialized training translating complex market requirements into actionable processes for rural operators. The ultimate objective of these resource persons is to guide the collective through formalization. Formalization requires clearing strict bureaucratic hurdles, securing exact legal compliance, primarily GST registration, and standardized FSSAI certifications. Next comes digital onboarding, registering on platforms like eGem and portals like Udyam Mitra. This is a non-negotiable prerequisite. Without compliance, corporate supply chains cannot legally engage with the collective. With the collective formalized and insulated, we can attach the final, macro level of the convergence framework. Currently, corporate social responsibility, or CSR, functions largely as passive philanthropy. Corporations fund the building of local schools or health centers to meet statutory obligations. To solve the graduation gap, CSR must evolve into active supply chain integration. The corporation directly links its supply chain requirements to the formalized collective, treating them as verified vendors rather than charity recipients. But this linkage exposes a final vulnerability, the sector trap. Even formalized collectives are routinely relegated to culturally feminine businesses with low financial ceilings. They remain restricted to low-return, traditional production, processing raw fibers or basic foodstuffs. The domestic market for these items is finite, limiting the ceiling for revenue. True corporate linkage enables a new mandate: aggressive diversification into high-return, non-traditional industrial sectors. The framework must pivot these collectives toward managing rural transport fleets, maintaining regional road assets, and executing heavy infrastructure operations. Direct integration into these high-yield corporate sectors provides the sustainable, massive-scale demand required to definitively lift these collectives out of poverty. This is the completed architecture: the insulated core, the hyperlocal incubator, the institutional knowledge engines, and the corporate supply anchors. The transition from an informal microbusiness to a formalized macroeconomic employer requires this precise, multidimensional convergence. Isolated microcapital cannot survive in a vacuum. It requires formalized physical infrastructure, digital empowerment, and direct high-yield market wintage to function. When engineered correctly, the result is a formalized high-yield rural economic engine capable of executing complex logistics and sustaining significant local employment. This structural alignment achieves the ultimate policy objective: the localization of sustainable development goals, proving that global economic targets can be met through highly capable local action. This engineered convergence is the definitive solution to the graduation bottleneck. By connecting local governance, institutional knowledge, and corporate markets, we can transform marginalized collectives into robust, scalable engines of the national economy.